be able to have this longest day webinar series. This is the first of 4, and we look forward to the rest of the day. We're hoping that many of you are signed up for more than one of these. This is all in our hope to continue to raise awareness for Alzheimer's, both for the longest day event and particularly for our Walk to End Alzheimer's, as we are a proud national team member. So I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Carla Sutter, and I am the Director of Operations for Synergy HomeCare. We are a national organization of home care offices located throughout the country. My background is as a social worker, a clinical social worker, and have worked with families and clients around the country whose life has been impacted by age or illness, and really I'm looking forward to be able to do this web series. This first topic is on finding hope and the changing roles and responsibilities of the care partner. And it is my hope that for those who are listening who are caring for somebody in their life who is living with either Alzheimer's or another chronic or acute illness, that this will provide you some support and peace and resources. And for those who are working with those family members, that this will help you to understand some of the things that these clients and their families are going through. I think it's really important as we begin with this slide, and for those of you who are going to be participating in more than one of these webinars, you'll see this slide come up in, I think, probably all of my sessions. And I think it is just really key for all of us to understand that as we are experiencing any aspect of life, whether it is just kind of those that are the normal parts of life, whether it's our work environment, whether it's our home environment, whether it's raising children, that we have to remember that there are things in our lives that we can control, things in our lives that we can influence, and things in our lives that we cannot control. And I think that oftentimes the times that we are impacted the most, the times that we experience the most stress, the times we feel the most out of control is when we put our energy, our time, our resources, our finances into the wrong bucket. We often try to control things that we have no ability to do so. If we think about illness, for instance, we can't control oftentimes whether we have a diagnosis or not. We can certainly influence it often by some of our choices that we've made early in our lives due to the way that we've lived our lives, but we can't control it. And I think that if we find a way to really think about this each time we're facing a crisis, that it is going to be an easier kind of battle to manage by really recognizing which pieces and where our resources, where our time is placed.
But do you love me?
Do I love you?
Well.
And I started with that particular clip. It's one of my favorites from Fiddler on the Roof, a very well-known Broadway show, because I think it represents, at the time as we're caring for someone in our life, that we often begin to question the relationship. We begin to question the love. We begin to question how we're going to continue to manage this relationship in the face of, in this situation, illness. And so that's just we're gonna kind of use that as a theme in terms of for asking ourselves, asking our partner, what the relationship today is going to be. I like to think sometimes about the experiences that we have in life as if we're taking a trip. And I think oftentimes when you think about planning for a trip, you are eagerly anticipating it. You've packed your bags and off you go. You've spent time researching, all of what's going to happen. You read books and all of that. You buy a bunch of guidebooks. You make wonderful plans. Maybe you're going to Italy, and you're planning this wonderful vacation, the Colosseum, the Michelangelo, the gondolas. You learn some handy phrases in Italy, and it's all so exciting. And after months or years of anticipation, the day arrives, your bags are packed, and off you go. You get onto the plane, and several hours the plane lands, and the flight attendant comes in and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say. What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to some horrible, filthy place full of pestilence and famine and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out, and you must buy a new guidebook, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy. It's less flashy than Italy. But you've been there for a while, and you can catch your breath, and you look around, and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, tulips, and even Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, "Yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned." The pain of that will never, ever go away because the loss of that dream is very significant. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. This was an original version of a story that was written by Emily Kingsley. And she was the mother of a child with autism. And she wrote that story really to explain what it was like living and kind of raising a child with autism. And it really could have been a child with any disability. But I think it is so fitting for any of us whose lives have been shifted and changed when a diagnosis comes into our life for our loved one. And I think it's a really wonderful way to experience it. That poem can be looked up, and again, it's called "Welcome to Holland" by Emily Pearl Kingsley. Fairy tale stories rarely have chapters on driving a loved one to appointments, helping them dress, or making sure they have taken their medication. I think what is key, though, is that we have to recognize among that successful relationships are possible in the face of illness and disability. And again, as the story shared a moment ago, it's different than what we thought our lives were going to look like. It's different than what we had probably planned for many years. But it is still a story that can have a happy ending, even among the fears and the tears of what you are facing with an illness. I think sometimes as we are living with those things we can't control, and again, as human beings, we want to remain in control. It is something that keeps us grounded. It's something that we work towards in every facet of our life. And I think sometimes the way to manage the things that are uncontrollable is to truly redefine what success is, what we are trying to gain now. And I think about this in terms of if you've ever been driving in an unfamiliar territory and you come upon a fork in the road and you have a split second to decide which way to turn. To complicate matters, you have a semi-truck coming up to your rear bumper and you need to be quick with your decision. And you know that if you take the wrong turn, you'll be wasting time and gas, and now you'll have to find a way back and try it all over again. I think as we sit with that for now, and as you sit with that after this session, think about what that experience conjures up as you're sitting in the car and you're watching what's going on around you. It truly is a sense and a lack of control. I hope that the rest of today's sessions, both with this one and really for all of them today, my goal and our goal here at Synergy Home Care is really to determine how we can better manage those out-of-control experiences, find the resources that can support us and our loved one, and really, again, find our way back on the road, again, with a different idea of success, with a different roadmap and maybe going to a different place. The reality is that illness often puts a mirror to our relationships. A chronic progressive illness changes our frame of reference. Many of us who are living with someone who has been diagnosed, again, with a chronic or progressive illness or an acute illness, particularly those who are living with someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, the plans that we have become overturned. Those things that we thought we were going to do, particularly because with Alzheimer's often begins to become, we're aware of it. At the same time, we often are making all of our plans for retirement, all of the things that we've worked towards, where our money has been going to, the changes that are going to happen just in terms of retirement are now impacted by this new diagnosis. In addition, new responsibilities are added. New tasks that we never thought that we would be the ones responsible for. And what happens often is that the frailties in our relationships can become magnified. And not just the frailties in the relationship with who we are caring for, but often those relationships that surround our coupling, our friends, our secondary family members, those relationships that we may not have even recognized as tenuous or may not have even recognized as not a strong, committed relationship can tend to have a mirror put to them and really show itself for what it is. So now we are kind of, our grief is magnified because we are really now having to experience many things all at once. Daily routines certainly change. Things that were maybe already difficult, getting ready for work in the morning and getting out the door when you're not a morning person, now becomes even harder when you are needing to set somebody up for their day, ensure that they have everything they need, potentially ensure that the caregiver who is coming to them or the resources that are coming in or that the client is going out to have to be set up so that everything is running like a timepiece. The other thing at the same time is that we have to be aware of caregiver burnout, that we are trying to take on so many roles at one time that we really become not only not beneficial to the person we're caring for, but we really become a liability almost for ourselves because our own health is jeopardized. And while we hear so often anecdotally how the caregiver, the care partner becomes often more ill than the client, the person they're caring for, that really is rooted in reality, because we tend to forget about caring for ourselves, doing any of those things that kind of bring us back, and only focus on the provision of care for somebody else. Roles often change, and the reality is as they change, resentment can occur. And we have to be, I think, aware that resentment can happen. We have to be accepting that resentment may be there, and then we have to find ways to work beyond that because those roles are going to be there. The person we're caring for may have been the primary breadwinner, and because of the diagnosis, they no longer can be doing that. And so now we may have to take on new jobs. At the same time we're providing care, we may have to find ways to bring in additional monies. Some of those monies may not be going just for the normal bills, but may be going to support the additional care resources that are needed. We may be caring for the person that really was the handyman in our life, that did all those little tasks, that killed the spiders, that did all of those things, that no longer is something that we can rely on them for. And now we have to either take on that role, or we have to once more find the people surrounding us that can participate in that. And most important, that we have to redefine goals. And again, those goals at the beginning of an illness may not have to be adjusted in whole ways, but may have to be slowly adjusted. You may have been planning to move into a new home, and now, because you have to be thinking about not what's just facing you tomorrow, but really facing you in the next several years, you may have to adjust what that home looks like. If you're needing to maybe move to a one-level home or a smaller home where things are not going to be as confusing for somebody, you may need to be getting rid of some items that no longer are safe to have around, even though those are things that provided you comfort and were really part of the original home. Travel plans may have to change, where you may have been wanting to go on big walking tours across the country. Maybe now you're needing to change that to going on a cruise where things are just quieter, everything is right there. On those days where things aren't going well, you can be in a stable, set environment and not have to be walking around. The ship is kind of becomes familiar versus each day changing. So again, we're redefining goals along the way. When the care partner is also the significant other, again, it is redefining roles in your relationship. It's redefining roles within your community, how people see you as a couple. Are you being invited out any longer as a couple? Are those around you comfortable with how you and how your partner is able to respond in social settings? Or is their kind of uncomfortableness something that they're able to talk with you about, or is it something that they just kind of walk away, not because they don't care, but because they don't know what to do or how to react? It's keeping reasonable expectations, and certainly in the beginning when we're working with somebody and living with somebody who still is able to participate in fairly meaningful ways, it's really having those conversations about what we can expect from each other in all ways, in our emotional ways, in our financial ways, and as well as in our intimacy. It's reasonable expectations of our environment. Again, thinking about what do we need to change to ensure that we have the best ability to maintain the most independence, and really thinking again about our goals. Illness does not mean sainthood, and I think what often happens is those around us want to place this title on us as to what a saint you are for providing the care for the person you love and would do. And oftentimes I think care partners don't feel like saints because the people who are saying that don't get to hear their inner voices that they're struggling with every day. They don't hear the resentment that they live with in their mind, and I think it's really hard when those in the community name us something that many times we don't feel that we deserve. It's needing to temper our own need for certainty and build trust in the unknown. And I think what happens is many people at their core have a resilience, have an ability to manage when things aren't going as anticipated. But that is not something that we all have as a natural sense of kind of person. And for many, we have to kind of add that in and figure out ways to create that sense of resiliency. I think one of the hardest things for couples who are living with one of the individuals who has a diagnosis, particularly a diagnosis that is impacts every aspect of a personhood, like Alzheimer's, is that we have to find ways to keep dating. We have to find ways to keep that relationship in an emotional realm, not just in a task-driven realm. We often talk about that elephant in the living room, and certainly illness brings that up. And we have to think about, for the whole family, the radical and immediate impact on everyone in the family when a diagnosis occurs. We have to understand that life before the diagnosis can and will impact life after the diagnosis. How we've managed leading up to the diagnosis will absolutely impact what happens next. In families where there is strong communication, where during the time of stress people come together, people are able to allow for kind of a disrupt. People are not uncomfortable when things aren't going as planned. Those families are able to manage this much better in the immediate. It is not that takes away the grief, the loss, the sadness, the fear, but it allows them to communicate in a way that is going to make everybody kind of find their path. It's really important to kind of think about, for your own family, how are big situations communicated? How do you talk with your adult children? How do you include them in parts of your life? And you may need to begin to change some of those communication styles, because now you may need that connectedness even more than ever. And while you may not have communicated with your adult children, things about your finances or your estate plans and things like that, it may be that much more important to ensure that they are included in, because it's not something that one person can handle on their own. It's important to educate everyone in the family and keep them informed. Be honest, though, about how you want information shared and if you want well-meaning advice. I worked as a hospice social worker for many years, and many of my clients would share with me that when people would come to visit, instead of just talking about what they had always talked about as friends or as relatives on an emotional level, they now were faced with people bringing reams of internet data about new cures and ways to manage disease, and how their aunt had managed it, or their neighbor had given them advice. And what often these clients shared is that they just wanted to allow that person to know that they were on it. They were surrounded by a good healthcare team. They appreciated the well-meaning advice and information, but they didn't want it. And for those clients that were able to be honest with those people, it was an uncomfortable conversation initially, but they shared that it really helped moving forward, because the time they got to spend together was not about going over new treatments and diagnosis and all of that. It was really, again, going back to what was most important. So if people start sharing well-meaning advice, it's okay to say, I so appreciate the information you're sharing. I feel very comfortable with the healthcare providers that we have, but if we ever need additional information, I absolutely know to turn to you, because you are such a good researcher and it seems like you're very well connected. But in the meantime, let's really just focus on some of the things that are happening in your life, and we can talk about, some of the joys and the sadnesses that are happening in ours. It's important that, again, as you're talking with family particularly, not to keep diagnoses secret, because the reality is that we all are fairly in tune and recognize that something's wrong when something is wrong. But if we don't have a name for it, we often begin to conjure up things that are going to be much worse than what the reality really is. So naming it and talking about it is really key. Coping and adjustment of one member has great impact on the other. So as each part of the family system has the opportunity to really understand what's going on, and as they begin to cope and adjust, it's really going to help bring others into that same place. Mobiles are often used as a visual when we talk about family systems, and family systems is just the fancy clinical term to think about as, family units. The mom, the dad, the siblings, the aunts, the uncles, whoever is an important part of what makes us connected and who we're connected to. It can include friends. It can include whoever in the community is really part of what makes you able to function and be supported. And with a mobile, if one piece is taken out or altered, the mobile is often off kilter, and you will see it kind of moving and adjusting and trying to find its balance. And it does take time to put things back in order, but the reality is that all mobiles will find their balance. It may look off-kilter to the rest of the world, but it is balanced for what is available to it. The mobile will never look the same, but it can continue to function. And I think it's a really good visual for any of us who are living with a diagnosis such as Alzheimer's, or who are working with a family who is living with someone with Alzheimer's, is that we have to recognize that it will take time, and families find their back to quote-unquote normal, and normal for them is going to be very unique. It's going to be different than what it was, and we all, as support systems, have to try to help find how we do that, and recognize that, again, the new adjustment will look different, will feel different, but it doesn't have to be a negative. It's important for all families and to understand our family of origin and our present family care systems, what I like to call the legacy of care. How was care provided in your family? Who was the caregiver? How are decisions made? So when you think back to any situation in your family life where a decision needed to be made, who was the decision maker? Was it by committee? Was it one person? Is the one person who is the decision maker now the one person who is unable to because of their cognitive declines? It's really important to understand where we're coming from, to know where we're at, and know how we may need to adjust things, and how we may need to kind of be able to say, this is how it was done in my family. I was really happy with how we cared for my mother or how we cared for my sibling, and I want to try to duplicate how much of that as we can. But at other points, we may decide that the way that it had happened didn't fit for us. It wasn't what we wanted. There are families, for instance, who, every generation cares for the generation before them. And now in our lives that have changed at this point, where we have two working family members often, that we're managing children much later in life, that may no longer be realistic. And it doesn't mean that we can't change the patterns that have been set over time, but it does mean that things may need to be explained to those who were anticipating or expecting it to be a certain way. Oftentimes in healthcare, we've kind of talked about well spouse versus ill spouse. And I really think it's a misnomer, and I think we do a disservice to both partners when we name it that way. Because the reality is there are many shared experiences and emotional reactions for the one living with the disease as for the one who is caring for that individual. Because the reality is that both people have emotional and spiritual pain. It may be experienced differently, and perhaps because of, particularly when someone has Alzheimer's dementia, their coping skills, their cognitive abilities may not be able to recognize the pain in the same way, but that pain is certainly there and experienced. There's a mental and physical fatigue, one from the care provision and the other from the diagnosis itself and the disease and the symptoms. A loss of vitality for both. One who feels often that they are just the task provider and the caregiver, and that they've lost that sense of kind of who they are as the spouse, as the girlfriend, as the wife. And then that individual who is living with the illness and has lost some of their abilities and physical capabilities. And again, the physical toll. And who then is the family support system. So there really is this continuum of wellness, and it doesn't mean that as we are diagnosed that we kind of stop being able to provide any support and now only can be the caregiver, I think we have to kind of look at it more as a shared kind of care in many ways. For my time in hospice, I worked with some wonderful team members and worked with some wonderful chaplains in the hospice program. And he and I often did seminars together, and we did one on grief and loss in hospice. And he shared this visual called the grief case. And I thought it was really powerful to think about grief in this way, because during the course of our life, we experience a number of different types of losses. Some losses affect us for a while. Other losses stay for a long time. But what happens is that we accumulate these big and small losses in what we can think of as our imaginary grief case. And it's so important at the time that we are beginning to experience the true grief of the loss of not only the potentially the physical being of an individual, but certainly with a disease such as Alzheimer's, we see losses along the way as to, again, our partnership, our ability to have somebody who's a shared decision maker, who is able to relish in the same things, the grandchildren, all of those kind of pieces. And so our grief is building up at the same time that we're living with the individual. But in addition, the grief that we've experienced over our lifetime, some from very small items that we may not have even have thought about that were actually grief moments, and some from things that remind us about a loss of an individual, a loss of a person in our life, maybe from 10, 15, 20 years past, that we thought we had really kind of managed, but this new experience, this new grief, is bringing it back to the forefront. You know, what happens often, and I see this with caregivers, is that they have a emotional kind of burnout moment, and it often happens at the time with a client, maybe or a last client experience that wasn't the most powerful experience for them. It maybe wasn't the person or the client that they had the longest or closest relationship with. Maybe they had worked with them only for a few days, and then at their death or at some crisis moment, it was that kind of sent them reeling. And what that really is again, the accumulation of grief. It is not that it is that one grief moment, but it's really the accumulation of those. And so it's so key for all of us, particularly when there is an anticipated grief that's going to occur, that we really start exploring and thinking about the grief that we've had in our life, how we've managed it, what parts of it we may not have really explored or wanted to at that moment, and we may need to go back to it and really think about it. So think about your own grief case and what you would put in there, and what has value to be in there. This was really, the session is called Finding Hope, and so at some point we really needed to talk about what hope is. And so hope in the face of loss, and I think it's important to understand these two concepts. Loss is the experience of parting with an object, a person, a belief, or a relationship that has value to that individual. Hope is the emotional state which promotes the belief in a positive outcome related to events and circumstances in one's life. With loss, there are tangible and intangible losses. Intangible losses are less obvious and often harder to bring about support. Hope is cultivated when we have a goal in mind. There is a determination that a goal can be reached and a plan on how to reach those goals. And that's key as we think about hope. And really finding hope for any of you who are on this call because you yourself are facing a change and a diagnosis of a loved one. You've started having some goals, hopefully, by just learning about resources and finding the support. And that is helping you plan, and planning helps really maximize that hope. Hope has a difference when we think about hope and optimism. Hope entails pathways and thoughts to an intended goal, and optimism leads one to expect the best, but it does not necessarily provide any thinking about how we're going to arrive at this improved future. And so optimism is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't drive us to find a plan. It doesn't drive us to find a goal that we're trying to reach. Hope allows us to develop a new normal and allows one to realize that the life you are living is now your life. Again, it's now Holland, not Italy, but it has some beauty in it. It has joy in it. It absolutely has sadness in it as well, but there is a goal that you're trying to realize. Hope comes from making peace with ambiguity that surrounds your life as a care partner. And those are the ways that we find ourselves back in the presence of hope. You know, we often think about the airlines, and I know many of you have heard this type of paradigm, and there's not a lot we can learn from the airlines. They've created, bad seating, and we don't get, any food anymore, and we're often stuck with lines and crowds and fees. But one thing that I think they've done very well is to teach many of us as caregivers, and many who were raised and educated to take care of everyone else and address their own needs only if there was time, which there never is. But the one thing the airline talks about is when that oxygen mask comes down in a crisis on the plane, that you need to place it over yourself before placing it over those around you who need assistance. Because if we burn out, if we don't get that oxygen, we won't be any good to ourselves or our family members. We won't be able to do things that bring us joy in life. So it's so necessary to fill ourselves up, to keep ourselves well, whole, powerful, and complete, and then offer that to our family member after we've taken care of our own needs. And I know for caregivers, particularly for those that do have as their kind of core of themselves as caregivers, that is probably the most difficult piece, is to feel like they can take care of themselves at the same time they're taking care of somebody else. Part of that is having to maintain balance, having to, as that care provider, identify the challenges and fears that are in front of us. And those will shift and change in time as the diagnosis expands, as the diagnosis goes into later stages. But we have to learn how to relieve tensions, and the best time to relieve tension and learn that process is when things are not at their worst. And while I say that, and I recognize that it all feels at its worst sometimes, there are those moments where there is a moment of breath, a moment to be able to think, today's a good day. And on those good days is where we need to ensure that we're practicing how to relieve the stress, how to relieve the tension, how to find some more balance. Understanding how you cope, knowing how you as a family again coped together and how you cope individually, and thinking about your own attitude towards this. Again, this is a time where you may need to reach out for additional support, because this isn't something that everybody can do on their own, and very few people, in fact, can do this on their own. It is important to seek and accept help. Don't forget extended family and friends. Again, with my work, I've often had a lot of people who have shared. We have so many friends who ask if they can do anything for me, and I just don't feel comfortable saying yes, so I'm constantly saying no. And then when I talk with them, there's this whole list of things that have to get done that they're trying to do themselves. So years ago, I talked with clients about starting a list of needs. And you keep it in your purse, you keep it by the phone, you keep it wherever you may be. And it may on that list be rake the leaves, mow the lawn, pick up laundry detergent, do the laundry, take the garbage out. Whatever it is, you write anything down that you have as a need, big or small. Things that are easy to do, things that don't cost money, things that do cost money. And when somebody calls and asks if they can help, instead of just not even being able to think in that moment what you need, you now can pull out your list and you can offer them a few choices. And now it's on them to choose which one they're going to do, but anything they choose is something that's on your list and is important to you. This is also the way to ensure that you don't only have a freezer full of food, because that's people, you say, I don't need anything, they want to do something, so the only thing they feel they can do is to bring a dish for you to have, or a freezer item. This is a way to avoid that. So keep that list. And remember that if you on the other side, as you often have been, you want to have been able to reach out. You want to be able to help those around you. And people are just wanting that same thing back. Get professional help for the big issues and the small issues. There's wonderful support groups. Online support groups if you feel like you don't have time or the ability to leave the house, and those that are in person, and sometimes a combination of those. Continue to include your partner in the process to their capabilities. Don't separate them from the tasks. People want to find meaning in their life. They want to be able to do things, even if it's the simplest things as their diagnosis progresses. People still want to be helpful. They still want to feel that they have vitality, that they have meaning. And meaning may shift and change, and it may now be a very simple task of while you bring in the laundry, you give a few items to that individual, and they may fold it and refold it as you're folding things perfectly, but it makes them feel like they're doing something. And in the end, it gives you a sense that they're still a part of it. And don't stop planning. Make sure you continue to ensure that you have estate plans in place. When the person still has capability and capacity to sign documents, make sure that you have all the documents that you need done. Check and understand all the insurance plans and talk to people if you need assistance. I worked with a couple in hospice. They were in their early 60s. They had been just recently remarried. It was a second marriage for both. They were just enjoying that probably over the last few years. And at the time when they got married, one of their goals was to have a second house. This is in Minnesota, and many people have cabins up by the lake, and this was something that they had planned on doing. They wanted it as a place for both of their adult children to be able to come together, to be able to form new memories as a newly formed family. And they asked me on one of my times with them, should they buy this cabin that they were looking at? And certainly, as their social worker, it was not my place to be their real estate agent. I was not to talk to them about that, but I really more focused on what their goals were. And it really, in the end, was important for both of them, for different reasons, to go ahead and buy this cabin. For the individual who was ill and who knew that her time was limited, she wanted, and it was a security for her to know that her husband, her children would have a place to go that was theirs together, that was a place of comfort and peace, and she wanted him to have a place to remember her at in good times. And for him, it was going to be a place that again, he could develop the family together at. And so it was important that they kept planning, that they did the things that maybe to some had seemed not realistic to do in the face of end of life, but it was important for them as a family to do this. It is so important as a care partner to ensure that you know how to forgive yourself. You're going to be making a lot of decisions, and I think the most important thing you can keep in the back of your mind, and maybe on a piece of paper, in that drawer, in the refrigerator, on the refrigerator, wherever it is that you've made the decisions you've made with the information you had at the time you had it. I think so many care partners that I've spoken to go back to moments in time where they had to make a decision and they feel like maybe I didn't make the right decision. And all we have, because really people don't have, for the most part, ill intent. People aren't trying to make bad decisions in their lives and for the people they love. But they made the decisions they had with the information they had at the time they had it. And I think that one sentence is probably one of the most powerful sentences that any of us can keep with us, because it really resonates not just in the time of illness, but really for those of us who are parents, who have thought back to decisions we've made during our parenting, that, it was never done with ill intent, but it was done with what resources we had at the moment we had them. So I hope that if you take away from this one thing, it is writing that down and keeping it available to you, because you may not need it today, but down the line it probably will bring you a lot of peace and an ability to forgive yourself. It's important as you're going through this to maintain individual interests and friendships outside of the care that you're providing. So many caregivers struggle with guilt of leaving that person for any period of time and going off and doing things, even going off and doing the mundane tasks that need to happen. I had a client, and the husband was the one who was very ill, and he shared with me that his wife would not leave him, would not leave the house. And this was a couple who had been very independent with each other, had wonderful times together, but individually enjoyed their time apart. And now she would not leave. She wanted to be there at all times, even when there was caregivers in place. And he said, I love my wife, but I need some of my own time as well for my own thoughts. And I struggle and I hate to see that she won't leave. And I talked to her, who again was dealing with those feelings of guilt, to try to be there at every moment. And what we determined was that she had this wonderful ability to be able to go out and really become what we called his living postcard. That everything she did out in the community, whether it was just the small tasks or whether it went to a movie or she got to go to the Arboretum and see the spring flowers, that she could bring that back to him and share what he could no longer witness on his own, but she was now his eyes and ears to the rest of the world. And it was important for her to understand that that was part of her care tasks. We really made it a part of her care tasks to do that for her and for him. And it really allowed her to do it with joy and excitement for experiencing it first by herself and then to be able to share it with him. Again, it's no help to our partner if they can't and if we don't take care of ourselves. It's important that we negotiate that time away. It's important that we find the resources that we can surround ourselves with that we feel comfortable enough to leave that other person with. And for any of you, I will be doing at the 1:30 session, that's Eastern Time, the community resources from A to Z. So for those of you who are looking for how do we find those support tasks, what type of resources are there, that would be a wonderful session to be able to go. It's okay for us to share our own needs, our own sicknesses, our own faults with the person we're caring for, because again, that's who they've been. If they've always been your rock, if they've been your kind of person who's helped guide you, allow them to continue to be that person for you, up to the moment that they no longer can do that. And it will continue to shift and change and look different, but they will be able to still offer you something, if only just a handhold at that moment. I don't think we can ever have a conversation and a session where we're talking about taking care of oneself, where we don't talk about both breathing and having a improved health and diet plan. I'm going to spare us all the idea that, yes, it's at the time that we're caring for someone else, we should be caring for our own bodies. We should be eating healthy. We should be avoiding, excessive alcohol and nicotine and caffeine and all of those things. But more important than that is the idea of what is called square breathing. And we talked earlier in the slides about finding balance and finding ways to relieve stress, and this is absolutely one of them. But as I shared earlier, it is very difficult to introduce a technique into our lives that is going to provide us some stress relief if we only practice it at the time we are the most stressed. So this is something that we all need to practice at the time that we're feeling at our height. And in the face of illness, that may not be the same height that we would have had and the same less stress than we would have had in our past. But there are certainly moments that are going to be where we can literally breathe. And so it's important to practice this. So in those moments when you are at your pinnacle of stress, that you feel like you can't catch your breath, when you feel like you are only breathing and doing so in a almost hyperventilation way, this is when we introduce square breathing. And it is a very simple process. It is simply inhaling to the count of 4, holding our breath to the count of 4, releasing to the count of 4, and then repeating that same process. And you can be doing this, for a couple of times. You could do this for 5 minutes, but you will immediately feel your stress kind of reduce. You will immediately feel your blood pressure reduce, your pulse. It is a very powerful technique that is very simple. You don't have to learn, all of these yoga poses to do this and all of that. It is a very simple process for anybody to be able to do. So again, inhale to the count of 4, hold our breath to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 4, and repeat.
It doesn't change a thing, but even so, after 25 years, it has to go.
My hope is that today's session really allowed you to think about, again, for those of you who are care partners to someone who is living with Alzheimer's or living with another progressive or chronic illness, that the love is there, that the relationship is there, and now it's just readjusting. And it's important to try to remember those moments in time where you did have those enjoyable, fun, loving times, and those will be there throughout. And again, you just have to look for them in a little different way. I am so pleased to have been able to spend this time with you. And again, please feel free to go on to the synergyhomecare.com website. There are many different resources available there. We have a book that is free to download called Where Do We Begin? A Guide to Elder Caregiving that you may get, and it talks about different resources. It gives you tips and tools. It allows you to do some assessment of your own situation and how to better communicate with others. If you have any questions about our services or about this particular session, please don't hesitate to email, and you can find that email again at synergyhomecare.com, or you can email me directly at carlasutter@synergyhomecare.com, or feel free to call us at our main number and we would be glad to provide you any information and, again, support and resources as you are along your care journey. So I so appreciate your time, and I am just going to check to see if there are any questions. And please also, if you would like to make a donation to the Alzheimer's Association for our national team, you can find us at our Facebook page at Synergy HomeCare, Synergy Facebook at Synergy HomeCare, and we would appreciate that, as well as feel free to leave any comments and questions. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing your name at the next webinar that, again, will be beginning at 1:30